this will stay. It's never too hot, it's never too cold. Make you feel young when you're old. You don't need a reason or a rhyme on Alaska time. And everybody thinks you lost it when you tell them where you found it. Asking, man, are you out of your mind? Nobody knows just how we do it, but we know there's nothing
I followed you to Texas. I followed you to Utah.
We didn't find it there, so we moved on.
I went with you to Alabama. Things look good in Birmingham.
We didn't find it there, so we moved on. I know you're tired of following my elusive dreams and schemes, for their only fleeting thing, my elusive dreams. You had my child in Memphis, then I heard of work in Nashville.
We didn't find it there, so we moved on
To a small farm in Nebraska, to a gold mine in Alaska.
We didn't find it there, so we moved on.
And now we've left Alaska because there was no gold mine.
But this time, only two of us moved on.
And now all we have is each other, and just a little memory to cling to.
And still, I won't let you go on alone.
I know you're tired of following my elusive dreams and schemes, for their only fleeting thing, my elusive dreams, for their only fleeting.
While most libraries gather books, a specialized library in Juneau gathers history. Over the years, it served as a valuable tool for researchers seeking information about Alaska events.
The Historical Library was founded by the U.S. Congress in 1900 as a federal library, and the governor was designated the person responsible for building and continuing the collection, which he did for many years, and then the curator of the Territorial Museum assumed the responsibility until a librarian was finally hired in the 1950s. At that time, then, the library was able to become more accessible for general public use. We collect anything relating to Alaska in all formats. So we have publications, we have manuscripts, we have archival records. This is a manuscript journal showing the Organic Act for the city of Sitka. And also there's a response here for General Davis, who was the commanding general for the military district in 1867. The people in Sitka had petitioned the military commandant there, asking if they could establish city government so that they could have schools and take care of local municipal affairs. And he gave his permission in this letter, and then there's a preamble and the Organic Act, and then the various ordinances that were passed. Some of the rare books we've acquired, I have one here. Choris was the painter and artist on the Kotzebue expedition, which was a Russian expedition around the world in 1815 to 1818. And he did some illustrations for the Kotzebue expedition. Then he put out his own series of drawings and paintings, and these are copper engravings that are very beautiful. And if anyone wants to study life in early day Alaska before photography was in vogue, we have to go back into early illustrations such as these. A guide to historical photographs in the Alaska State Library is one of our, I think, one of our best projects that we've done to date. It was a way of sharing about 8,000 photographs in the collection, and the Alaska Historical Commission provided a grant to help with the fishing project. This collection is in about 100 libraries in Alaska and other locations around the United States. The project also served as a conservation project to save wear and tear on handling old originals. So we use it as a browser file, and we have 56 collections on fiche, which is just a very minimal number of our total collections here in the library, which probably number around 100 or 200 collections today. There are pictures in this library that deal with all parts of the state, and so people in Nome are very interested to see what photos we have of Nome, but they all might not be able to travel here. So by being able to share these statewide, more people have access to them. Sometimes in response to requests, we'll also, in answering one person's question, we'll try to find a way of sharing material further, and the Kuskokwim Community College needed a copy of the Eskimo, which was the first newspaper published in Alaska. It was done by the Western Union Telegraph Expedition in 1866 to 1867. And we microfished the publication, and we have some information on it and some sample pages here. And we sent this out in the depository program so it could be used around the state. To help people use the collection, such as our manuscripts and photographs that have come in, we have many finding aids here in the library to access material. If it's an important enough collection, we'll also put it out in published form for distribution to depository libraries. And Governor Park's niece donated his private papers and photographs, which are described in this finding aid. And then the Frances Noyes Muncaster papers is a very nice collection of a lady who was married to a Mr. Noyes, who was known as King of the Candle Mining District, and after his death, she eventually married a Mr. Muncaster from Haines. But she was a very petite, attractive young lady who really could take part in the pioneering frontier life. She was also a recorder for the Atlan Mining District. And the museum has a very fine ivory collection that she had collected when she was up in Arctic Alaska, and those materials are also described in here. Probably one of our most important collections is the Alaska Packers Association records. There's all kinds of things in here, and it's probably been one of our best used collections. People are studying ethnic labor in the canneries, or history of the Star Fleet. They would take these large sailing vessels loaded with canning equipment and personnel up, and then the ship would stay in the harbor until the canning season was over. And there was the Chinese contracts where they'd bring up Chinese and different ethnic groups to work in the canneries. And there's over 500 maps in here that show various salmon trap locations, that show properties owned by the packers. There's handwritten histories, there's pack reports, there's even things that the company gathered for their own information. There's extensive files of shipwreck reports. So the collection can be used for many purposes, and we do have copies of the microfilm materials that can be loaned. I really enjoyed working with the Alaska Packers collection because it's a topic that we've seen so many questions come on, and to have that resource available here has been a tremendous help. And then again, another favorite of mine is the BIA records, because it provided some new resource material that we hadn't had before. But there's a lot of very important, wonderful things here.
Been so long, I often wonder why I ever tried to change your mind. Yet I find I'm going back home, back to my own belonging. All I see is yesterday's pain coming back at me again. Yet in time I must find the reasons why. Look at you, look at your weary smile, and it's all that I can find. Forgotten memories about the ways and days you've changed. And if time could tell me one solitary thing, I would plead that I must find the reasons why. You try to break my worried mind. And it's all the same to me. The days pass into weeks. Along this path I found a trail of thorns, and it's all I know. Now I'm shallow, shaky on my feet. Find relief in the moments in between. Crouching down, I pray to find the reasons why. You try to break my worried mind. They went walking deep in the forest with a vision in their eyes. In the shadows of the canyons, climbing up the mountainside, climbing up that mountainside. He was a big man, full of passion, to build a railroad to the sky. Michael Haney said he could do it if they'd only let him try. If they'd only let him try. Their dreams were of the Yukon, searching for the Klondike gold. The rails wind from the White Pass, leading to a river swift and cold. Up that river swift and cold. Out on the ledges, men brave the powder, near the ridges steep and tall. To build the bridges, they set the charges, bringing down the granite walls, blasting down those granite walls. Into the valleys, laying the iron, as the snow begins to fall. From the shoreline of Lake Bennett, they could hear the whistle call. They could hear the whistle call. Their dreams were of the Yukon, searching for the Klondike gold. The rails wind from the White Pass, leading to a river swift and cold. Up that river swift and cold. In that time they had captured a spirit for a nation to see. They were men who did challenge a future that was wild and free. All their memories are not forgotten, nor the sacrifices made. They were the workers who built the railroad. With their strength in arm and life they gave. With strength in arm and life they gave. Their dreams were of the Yukon, searching for the Klondike gold. The rails wind from the White Pass, leading to a river swift and cold. Up that river swift and cold.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the Alaska Humanities Forum and the National Endowment for the Humanities, a federal agency. Major funding was made possible by Royal Caribbean Cruises and Wells Fargo Bank, Alaska. Additional support by the law offices of Simpson, Tillinghast, Sorensen, and Lawrenson.
Alaska, a vast territory of immeasurable beauty, and a storehouse of natural resources that have made it one of the wealthiest states in the Union. Now, oil is king of Alaska's economy, but there was a time when salmon ruled. Before statehood, when Alaska was still a territory, huge canneries owned by non-residents used giant fish traps to compete with local fishermen. That clash and the mindset of Alaska's military veterans after World War II were woven together in an unsuspecting way to shape Alaska's future.
Before coming to Alaska, I had already voted for president and for U.S. senator, and I got to Alaska and suddenly, smack in the face, I realized that I lost my basic civil rights, and there were a bunch of many other veterans who came up about the same time who had fought the war to make the world safe for democracy, and here we come to Alaska and we've lost our basic citizenship rights. So a bunch of us got quickly involved in the statehood movement.
Alaskans weren't really that mistreated up here when we were a territory. But we certainly didn't have any political rights. We certainly didn't have control of our destiny.
To secure those rights and achieve that destiny, Alaskans decided to declare them for themselves in a new constitution for a yet-to-be-born state. This is the story of how Alaskans wrote their constitution. The idea of statehood for Alaska had been argued for decades before the territorial legislature convened in 1955. Were the 200,000 residents of Alaska ready to govern themselves? What better way to show a reluctant Congress that Alaska was ready for statehood than to draft a constitution? So territorial leaders collected $300,000 to pay expenses for a convention and ordered it to be held in Fairbanks in November of 1955. To elect delegates, they also ordered a new set of political districts to encourage more grassroots representation.
In the legislature in '55 in which we were doing this work, there were 6 members from the 1st Division. 5 of us were from Juneau. There was 1 from Petersburg. Nobody from Ketchikan, Wrangell, Haines, Sitka, Skagway. From the 3rd Division, there were 10 members. All 10 were from Anchorage. Nobody from Palmer, nobody from Seward, Cordova, Kodiak, any other community in the 3rd Division. The 2nd Division, they were all from Nome. Nobody from Kotzebue, nobody from Unalakleet. Of course, Fairbanks really only had 1 community. I mean, the 4th Division had really only Fairbanks. But we determined the need for providing special election districts that would guarantee representation from any community in the state that had roughly 1,000 people or more.
With the election set for September of '55, candidates for the 55 seats at the Constitutional Convention fanned out in search of votes. Some ran at large, or representing no one community, while others, like Maynard Lomborg, were elected from small villages.
Our mission group had started a grade school in Unalakleet before the turn of the century, and some of the parents approached us and said, well, how about you starting a high school? And so I said, okay, I'll look into that, and we did. I mean, we were very much involved in the concerns of the people, and I guess I felt that I could probably represent that side of life at the convention if I was elected. So.
My slogan was basically, give us one man, one vote. And I used that slogan throughout the whole district. I had a Model 3A Stinson on floats, and I just packed it up and headed on down the Yukon River and up the the Kuskokwim River twice. I had an opponent from Bethel, and I handily won the election because I didn't have to worry about all of those people up there in urban America, which was Fairbanks at that time.
It was not a big media campaign. You contacted people you knew in various communities, got their support, they passed word around, and it was very informal. And the main slogan was, I'm for statehood, I have no axe to grind.
Oh yeah, my campaign, and some guy had been drinking quite a bit of the bubbly, and he came up with a tremendous slogan, the best vote for you is Buckaloo. Well, yeah, it wouldn't get me through the presidency, but it got me through the Constitutional Convention election.
Every political convention needs a presiding officer, and at the 1955 Constitutional Convention, a fair share of delegates thought Bill Egan should be president. Egan was in the territorial legislature at the time. In fact, he'd been Speaker of the House. A grocer by trade, Egan was a Democrat from Valdez, but during the brief campaign to serve as a convention delegate, he had gone out of his way to cross party lines.
So that was another thing that made for a very good convention. People ran not as Democrats or Republicans, and there were some young men in Anchorage who had worked together on Operation Statehood, and one of them was Barry White. And Bill Egan, the generous Bill Egan, knew that Barry White was a Republican. He took him with him in Valdez campaigning. And Barry White told me, and he told it to several other people, that he knows that he never would have been elected on his own if it hadn't been that Bill Egan took him under his wing, because he was such a good advocate for statehood.
But as the time came to start the Constitutional Convention, Bill Egan was not the only candidate for presiding officer. Other well-known politicians vied for the honor as well.
Vic Rivers was nominated. E.B. Collins of Fairbanks was nominated. E.B. Collins had been Speaker of the first House of Representatives in 1913, first territorial house. He was 82 years old, and he was and here he was, you know, a person out of Alaska's history.
I think on the first ballot, Bill had 21. And they had made a rule that the way the election would be held would be the person with the lowest would be dropped off at the next balloting so that it wouldn't go on forever.
Yeah, so then we have an elimination process going on and sort of dropping out the lowest vote getter, and Bill Egan gets it in the end. And that was probably a very decisive decision with respect to affecting the success of the Constitutional Convention. Bill Egan was fair, he was considerate, he was humane, he made sure that every delegate had equal opportunity to speak on any issue. Whenever things got too hot, too conflicting on something, he would call an at ease or recess and give people a chance to work things out.
Convention delegates came to Fairbanks armed with their opinions and experience. World War II in particular shaped the views of many delegates, especially the veterans.
The GIs brought into Alaska the Western philosophy. And the GIs that stayed here, they couldn't understand why, as red-blooded Americans that had served their country in the military in the war, didn't have a voice in their government, didn't have a voice in their Congress. And I think that, plus the reconstruction after the war, the building of the highway, building of reconstructing the railroad, and those things that happened probably set the tempo for we to be able to have our constitutional convention.
While the general mood for a convention was ripe in 1955, the actual homework needed to write a constitution fell to a handful of people, including Tom Stewart, the convention secretary. He recruited experts from around the country.
And I traveled with one or more of these consultants to Fairbanks, to Anchorage, to Kotzebue, to Nome, to Kodiak, and introduced them to the mayors, the school superintendents, and gave them a chance to talk with local leaders to get a feel, especially in the local government area, what should be done for local government. And they wrote papers, paper on the Bill of Rights, a paper on the executive branch, on the legislative branch, on the judicial branch, on finance and taxation, on apportionment of the legislature, on elections, on local government, and on natural resources. They wrote papers that didn't try to tell the delegates what to do, but they said, here is the way other states in their constitutions have approached this subject. Ultimately, the articles that they wrote on the topics of constitutional articles were compiled into a 3-volume set of studies, which was ready when the convention assembled in November in Fairbanks.
While Stewart commissioned written research, it took a vote of the convention before any outside experts were invited to Fairbanks.
One of the consultants that I had lined up was a wonderful man named Sheldon Elliott. Sheldon lived in New York City. He was the head of the Institute for Judicial Administration. And so I was promoting Sheldon as a consultant for the Judiciary Committee. Chairman of the Judiciary Committee was a lawyer from Anchorage whom I knew well, named George McLaughlin. George knew that I had talked with other delegates about the availability of Sheldon Elliott, and he was opposed. He didn't want any carpetbaggers.
McLaughlin and Elliott soon became friends, however, and together they helped shape the formation of Alaska's judicial system.
And I'm sure that the judiciary article was, as it is, which is a fine, fine article. It's the envy of every other state. Shows his handicraft as well as McLaughlin. And we had a man from the League of American Cities, John Bebout, who was an article written about him in the New York Times, Mr. Constitution, and a very, very fine professor from Louisiana State University named Kimbrough Owen. Kim Owen was the advisor to the Committee on Style and Drafting, and he said to them, this language must sing, it must have rhythm, must have a consistency.
It was one of Kimbrough Owen's last acts. Just 2 months later, he died in a plane crash. As it turned out, another consultant from Louisiana addressed delegates that winter. He paid his own way to Fairbanks and had one mission: convincing Alaska that, like Tennessee, it should elect a delegation to lobby Congress for statehood.
I talked to a number of Alaskans that claimed credit for it, but I think that George Lee Leitner, of all places, from that Citadel of Liberty in Louisiana, came up and talked to the delegates, and he's the one that sold the Alaska-Tennessee plan to the delegates at the convention.
And right at first, several of us were opposed to that. I just thought it was a little too brash. But the more you got to thinking about it, that maybe this is what was necessary. And the individuals that went were strong individuals: Bill Egan, and Greening, and Rivers, Ralph Rivers. And then Bob Bartlett being there, that gave a pretty good lobbying committee, per se.
The time and place of the convention were set by the legislature, but not without some debate. Tom Stewart remembers who gave him the idea of holding the convention in Fairbanks.
New Jersey had held a very successful constitutional convention in 1946 and had produced an acclaimed modernized state constitution. And I went to Trenton, where some of those people lived. Particularly, I talked to two of the officers of the New Jersey Convention. One was a woman named Katzenbach. She was the one that persuaded me that we should have our convention at Fairbanks, at the university campus, rather than in the Capitol in Juneau.
Stewart had some practical experience that influenced his selection of Fairbanks. It revolved around the closing days of the 1953 territorial session.
That session, I remember distinctly going into the men's room, and there was a wastebasket that was tall, and it was filled to the brim with whiskey bottles, mainly whiskey being consumed by the members. The Speaker of the House was a man from Fairbanks named George Miskovich, who was a Republican and a miner from Fairbanks. And he had in his desk drawer a coffee cup, but he filled it with whiskey behind the desk. And the House was in such a shambles that they never did adjourn. They just got up and went home in the middle of the night.
Despite the anger of some of his Juneau constituents, Stewart insisted on holding the Constitutional Convention in Fairbanks, and delegates from other towns quickly saw his wisdom.
It was not taken seriously by, you might say, the special interests, the banking interests were not there. The fisheries lobbies were not there.
Really was kind of an academic drill. I mean, I think the lobbyists and everybody else figured, well, hell, those guys are not going to get to be a state anytime this century. I don't know what they thought, but it wasn't significant enough for them to waste any money or time.
That kind of isolation could not be duplicated at a second Constitutional Convention, but delegates at the first one believe a few rules could be reenacted, such as a 75-day time limit.
75 days is amazingly short. I don't know how they picked 75 days, but you end up working day and night. I often wondered what would happen if at the end we just say to the territory and the ones that were involved with the stated commission that, look, sorry, we just are not finished with this. I don't think anyone would dare to even have thought of that.
The time limit contributed to the brevity of the proposed Constitution. In roughly 12,000 words, the 1955 convention laid out a blueprint for a new state. George Sundborg, a former newspaper reporter, was chairman of the Style and Drafting Committee.
I'm sure I was chosen because of my background as a writer. Yeah, I was considered to be somebody who could work with words. So that was my job, and it was very hard to get some of the delegates to agree to the changes which we recommended. They had a pride of authorship in what they had proposed, and they liked the language, and especially the lawyers. They liked language that, you know, went all around Robin Hood's barn and put in a lot of herewiths and thereafters and so on, and we cut all that junk out and made it very simple and easy to understand.
The convention did most of its work in public, even if the public paid little attention at the time. And that's a lesson for any future convention.
I remember early on, there was some rumor that a bunch of people from Southeast Alaska had gotten together after the session. And I think they were probably talking about moving the capital. And one of the delegates went to the chairman of the Rules Committee and said, I hear that there was a caucus that was not announced. And I'll tell you, I'll warn you right now, if that ever happens again, I'll blow you all this convention wide open. And you know that it never happened again.
Finally, after 74 days of debate and wordsmithing, the convention delegates met on February 5th to sign the proposed Constitution. One delegate, who objected to various parts of the document, boycotted the signing ceremony. But for most of the 54 others, the day was an emotional one.
So when it came the time that I had to call the roll for the last time, I felt like, I'm so privileged to have been. I mean, it was not work, it was a privilege. And I think there wasn't a dry eye when I looked up. I mean, there were some hard-nosed guys sitting there in the front row, and I saw that there were tears even in their eyes.
But when delegates left Fairbanks that February, they had just 2 short months to explain the proposed Constitution to voters. Would Alaskans endorse the Constitution, or even bother to vote? Some Alaskans argued a better Constitution could be drafted after statehood, not before. But the election that April of 1956 was not just about a draft Constitution. As fashioned by the Constitutional Convention, the ballot was also about fish traps.
The processors were located, their headquarters were all down south, and they had the traps, so all the fish they caught, they were theirs. And these traps were huge, you know, they were really big. Anyway, and then they took their money and they took their crews and went south, and that was it. And all the money went with them.
Fish traps were kind of, I guess, like slavery in the South. You know, it was a real evil with the fishermen, and of course it was an economic bonanza for the guys that owned the traps. And then the Alaskans had to get out in those little boats in the rough water with the nets, and so it was kind of an unequal economic opportunity of a monstrous shape. But so it was a kind of an issue that would bring the voters out.
And a good many coastal candidates had used the trap issue as a campaign issue in getting there in the first place. Elder is a good friend of mine, was then, and talked to me rather regularly on, I can't go back to Petersburg until we address traps realistically.
But delegates were reluctant to put a specific ban on fish traps into a general body of law, the Constitution. The ballot measure, a law that would take effect the moment Alaska became a state, was very simple.
Just said that, you know, fish traps are abolished in all the territorial waters, and that was really, you know, the traps were gone when Alaska became a state, but my thinking was that if we had that separate ordinance, that more people would get out and vote, particularly in the outlying areas. They knew that they had to be a state, and they had to get rid of it. The only way to get rid of the fish traps was to vote yes on the Constitution and yes on the abolition of fish traps.
The strategy worked. Alaskans voted 2-1 for the Constitution and 5-1 to ban fish traps. When Congress voted 3 years later to admit Alaska to the Union, both became law. A lot has changed in Alaska since 1955. The discovery of oil generated unimagined wealth for the state, bringing new technology and many new residents to Alaska. More than 24 times they've voted to amend the Constitution, to create the Alaska Permanent Fund, for example, or limit entry to commercial fisheries. But voters so far have been reluctant to authorize another constitutional convention.
Maybe it's not as easy to amend as some, but we have left it up to the people every 10 years to say if we want a convention, we'll vote for it.
That if we had a constitutional convention, you would find a tremendous amount of legislative law put into the Constitution. I think our Constitution would be like the California Constitution. It would take a bookcase instead of a pamphlet.
I have a hunch that if we had a convention, that even if people came with special interest in whatever they had access to grind, by the time they got together and started thinking about the seriousness of what they're doing, that it isn't just pushing a particular idea, but that they're dealing with the next decades of the state of Alaska, that again a unity would be created, and that the common good, the public good, would prevail. That is my optimistic hope.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the Alaska Humanities Forum and the National Endowment for the Humanities, a federal agency. Major funding was made possible by Royal Caribbean Cruises and Wells Fargo Bank, Alaska. Additional support by the law offices of Simpson, Tillinghast, Sorensen, and Lawrenson.